I'm Zoe. I'm Zoe. I'm the VP of NASA, the Native Indigenous Student Association over at UConn. And before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and read our land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Bogasset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land, and we aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. With that being said, welcome to this event. We're really excited to host Indigenous perspectives from these different universities in Connecticut. We did an event similar to this for Indigenous Peoples Week last year, where it was just members of NASA speaking on their experiences, but it's been really cool to make connections with Quinnipiac and Yale. Thank you guys so much for coming out to talk about what you kind of experienced at your own universities. With that being said, we'll go ahead and start with introductions. I'll just read off
Do you want to let them do their land acknowledgements?
Oh yeah, sorry. Do you want to do your land acknowledgement from Yale and Quinnipiac? Okay, cool. If it's fine, we'll
just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we'll go ahead with that. So for our first question, this is also like our introduction. So you can say your name, your community, what school you go to, and then tell us a little bit about your journey to higher education and why you picked your university. So we'll start off with Nolan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nolan Arkansas. I am currently a junior at Yale College, and I'm Cherokee from Cherokee homelands in the mountains, kind of in between like North Carolina, Tennessee, and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And yeah, any pronouns are fine. And do you want us to go? You said go ahead and answer the first question. Okay. So let's see, my journey to higher education. Honestly, y'all have to come back to me, but I'm gonna pop in it.
Okay, cool. From there, we'll move to Kiara.
All right. Akwe, Kiara Chandraquidjian Nuisawak. Hello, everyone. My name is Kiara Chandraquidjian. I am from the Mohegan tribe of Uncasville, Connecticut. I'm also currently in Wallingford, Connecticut. So that is the ancestral lands of the Quinnipiac and the Wagunk, I believe. I don't want to butcher that, but I had to look it up. But at school, we are on Quinnipiac ancestral lands. And I am currently a senior at Quinnipiac University, graduating in December, which is actually terrifying to say out loud. And I'm a health science studies major and a minor in Indigenous cultures and diversity studies, which is an independent minor. And my journey to higher education is a little wonky. I kind of knew that college was always something I was going to pursue. I don't know why I knew that or how I knew that, but I just kind of knew. So I applied to colleges. I went to a few fly-in programs. Shout out to Sage. We met at Dartmouth, which is kind of crazy, 4 years ago. And I applied to schools, and I only applied to Quinnipiac because it was close to home, and I kind of wanted like a backup option to have close to home. And I'd gotten into other schools, but something personal had happened in my family, and I had to stay close to home. And something that I was looking at when I was applying to schools were schools that had Native populations and communities and spaces for Native students or Native courses of study. None of those things at the time were offered at Quinnipiac, so it was not my first choice, but it was the only option that I had at the time because I needed to be close to my family and able to be only a phone call in the car right away. So I don't regret choosing Quinnipiac though, because I'm glad that I was able to kind of take what was a clean slate and kind of help build it up to what we are now as the Indigenous Student Union and the other Indigenous initiatives that we have on campus.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Sage, do you want to go next?
Good day, Louise, No Child, Benawapskeg, Wabanaki, Kachiwiliwini, Kachiniwez, Nagunsis. My name is Sage Phillips. I come from the Penobscot Nation. We are the Wabanaki people, so homelands and what we currently refer to as the state of Maine. I am a senior here at UConn, double majoring in political science and human rights with a minor in Native and Indigenous studies, and I'm the president of NASA. I'm very fortunate to have that group be established on campus. That said, I guess my journey to higher ed was a little different. So college was always something that I grew up like, you are going to college. There's no option. That's just kind of how my parents raised me. So I grew up assuming that I would be attending the University of Maine my entire life on a tuition waiver, which, I never really questioned it. It was always like, why would my parents give me the option to make them spend money elsewhere? So until like my junior year of high school, I finally worked up the courage to say, do you think I could look somewhere else? UMaine was like a 2-minute drive from my high school. Everyone goes there. It was obviously super close to the res in my tribe, but I just knew like for myself, I needed a little bit of a shift. So as Kiara said, I did a couple of fly-in programs, met some pretty awesome Indigenous students at universities that fostered great Indigenous community and a sense of belonging, which is not where I ended up. So ended up at UConn, obviously, with the sole intention to sort of build a program. And, I kind of went into it with my dad's guidance, which was super critical. Just, he was just saying to me, take your help elsewhere and put it back into the community, which, it was a big risk to take, but very happy I ended up at UConn and very proud of how far this community has come.
Thank you, Sage. We'll go to Hema next.
Bonjour, Hamanidijnakas, Turtle Mountain Indunjba. Hi, everyone. My name is Hema. I'm originally on my mom's side, Turtle Mountain Ojibwe from Belcourt, North Dakota. But I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my dad is also Gujarati from India. I'm a junior at Yale studying the history of science, health, and medicine and education studies. And if I missed anything, let me know, but I think I'm onto the question now. You she, her pronouns, she, her pronouns. I think my journey to higher education, I grew up really fortunate. Both my parents went to college. So they always made it something that seemed like I could pursue and follow, which is not the case for a lot of students, particularly Native students. So I was really grateful for that upbringing. And I also went to Indigenous flying programs, which is where I met Evan. So this is so funny. Shout out to all of those programs. They're wildly successful. And seeing other Indigenous students like follow their dreams and pathways and think of leaving home, even though it's really difficult to pursue bigger things, like definitely stuck with me. And I had a really hard time choosing between my like home university, the University of Minnesota, and Yale, because Yale has a really dark history. It's not a very inviting place, and there's a lot wrong with it simply. But I like basically went and talked to all my aunties, and I was like, what do you guys think I should do? And they just said that it's sort of like an opportunity that I couldn't give up in that moment, and that home would always be there for me to come back to. So that's how I kind of ended up here, and truly still grappling with it. I think like Evan and I were fortunate to like come into a program, and Nolan come into a program that was already somewhat developed, but still like so much work to do. So I'm really glad that we're all meeting today, and that we've like developed our relationship between us to keep working in all of our universities.
Yeah, and Sage just put in the chat, Hema has a beadwork Instagram account, and she says beautiful artwork. You guys should really check it out if you get the opportunity to. It's wonderful. We'll move on to Rania next.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Rania Bensdock. I'm a senior at Quinnipiac. I'm a philosophy and political science double major here. And my tribe is from Tiziweza, we're the Kabyle people of Algeria, North Africa. And I'm a first generation college student in America. Obviously, my parents came from Algeria. And the reason why I chose Quinnipiac, honestly, is because the scholarships that were offered to me and financial reasons. And so it was the best decision for me at the time. Like Kiara said, I don't regret it at all, because I've learned that because of my decision, it came with a lot of responsibility, and I'm glad to be part of ISU and being able to just do the things that we need to do for the community. So yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Sophia next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia. So I'm Taino, which are the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, and that's from my mother's side. So I'm originally from New York, but I ended up going to UConn, and I'm a poli-sci major with an HGFS minor. It definitely is unexpected. I get asked a lot, like, why, if I'm from New York, did I come to UConn? Similar to Rania, the money, the scholarships. UConn is very good with that, but I really enjoyed the cultural centers, or at least what was showed to me during orientation. Being Puerto Rican is a big part of who I am, and PURLAC, which is the Puerto Rican Latin American Cultural Center, seemed to be very open and just a place where I could express my culture and connect with people. Hasn't been the case, but then due to the mentoring program that Zoe runs, UCNC, I was given the opportunity to become part of NESA and kind of delve into my Taino background, which many Puerto Ricans don't look into, and it tends to be overlooked. A lot of people consider Tainos to be completely extinct when that's not the case. We just don't have any more full-blooded Tainos. So NESA NACP has been a great place for me to explore my culture and share it with other people and let other Puerto Ricans be proud of our Taino heritage. And I've really enjoyed it so far. It was expected for me to go to college. So I was pushed by my parents, but I don't regret it. And I love UConn. And I'm so proud of the changes and moves that have been made by NACP to, bring more natives to campus and make sure that we're getting everything that we need.
Thank you, Sophia. And I'm sure Sage and Sophia and Sammy can attest to this too, but Sophia has been like the biggest rock for like our organization at NESA. So it's incredible to have her here and be a part of that. Evan, do you want to go next?
Yes, hi. Evan Yuchadosak Yale Ayahat Nasteri Yadi Koi Kondach. My name is Evan. I use she, her pronouns. I am Tlingit, which is a tribe in Alaska, but I grew up in Colorado. And I'm one of the co-presidents along with Hema of the Association of Native Americans at Yale. And I'm a junior here. I'm studying ethnicity, race, and migration, which is ethnic studies. I chose Yale. I was also very fortunate to have two parents who went to college and always expected and supported me in going to college. And I also kind of wanted to go away from where I had grown up and experience a different part of the country and meet new people farther away from where I grew up. So I went to lots of Indigenous fly-in programs, met Hema at one at Dartmouth as well. And just was really drawn to Yale because, as Hema and Nolan have mentioned, the community was already established here, and our community is still changing and growing and everything like that. But it really was upperclassmen Indigenous students who made me feel like I would have a place on campus and could have a community here. So Yale was incredibly welcoming in terms of the Native student population there.
Thank you. Sammy, do you want to go next?
Sure. Akoya Witaku. My name is Samantha or Sammy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from Granby, Connecticut. I come from the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, and I'm the secretary of NESA. To answer the question, I was really set on going to a social justice oriented university, but none of the schools I applied to had specific things that met my interests, like Indigenous or Native groups that were too big. But it was definitely something that I was strongly considering. I also went to some fly-in programs. I attended a diversity fly-in at Tufts University, and I was really tempted by that because they had a really small Native and Indigenous program, but it was something that I was passionate about, so I was happy to build it. But ultimately, as I'm a sophomore now, I did choose where I went to school during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So UConn ended up being the best choice because it was the best for me financially. And that's how I ended up here, but I don't regret it because I found some amazing communities, and I'm so thankful to Sage and Zoe and everyone I've met so far for their amazing work, and I'm so excited to continue it.
Okay, thank you. And then Nolan, do you want to circle back to your journey to higher education?
Sure, thank you so much for coming back to me, and thank you so much everybody for sharing. It's just making me think a lot kind of about my own trajectory, and I feel similar to a lot of other folks in that I think that I always felt encouraged by my teachers and by my adults to just pursue college. I mean, that was kind of like, it seemed like the only option for me growing up. And I was really set on going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I think because my dad was like a huge Carolina Tar Heels fan, and he actually played basketball in college. And so I think he definitely encouraged me a little bit to like go to like a state school like that. But then when I was 17, I ended up going to a program, like a summer program at Princeton, which was for like just underrepresented students, so like minorities, Native Americans, for example. And that was kind of my first real experience with like a private school. And while there, I learned about how private schools, particularly private schools in the Northeast, have so many resources for research, and that just really intrigued me. I one day want to become a professor, and so I'm really interested in like doing my own personal research related to like gender studies, Native studies, creative writing, literary histories, what have you. And I applied to 10 schools, which was so hectic, but I ended up choosing Yale because it was the school that I visited. And when I got here, this was pre-COVID, and so we could like stay with people and like kind of just do whatever. And I stayed here for a weekend with another Native student. His name's Jake Rosales. And I was still deciding, like, do I want to go here or do I not want to go here? And I remember my friend Kinsale and I hung out pretty much all that weekend. We were just kind of like, we didn't know what was going on with Yale, but we went to the Native American Cultural Center, which is just a 3-story, pretty small house that's devoted to the Native community at Yale. And gosh, we were so tired. And so Kinsale and I just sat down on this little couch in one of the lobbies, and we both fell asleep at like 6 p.m. And then when we woke up, there were all of these upperclassmen, which they were probably like 20, 21 years old. But to me, being young, I thought they were just like old and grown and really mature. But when we woke up to like the smell of fry bread because the older students were cooking us dinner. And then we all kind of shared food together, and like people were just cracking jokes, and it felt warm and it felt inviting, and it just felt like I could feel at home in the Native community, which is like just such a huge privilege and such like an amazing feeling, because not everybody gets to feel like at home at school, and not everybody gets to feel at home in Native communities. But for me, it was like something that I really wanted. And yeah, so now I'm a junior at Yale.
Thank you for sharing. I also used to live in North Carolina for like 10 years. And so I felt the pull of Chapel Hill as well for a while. Okay, so now we're going to get into the rest of our questions. I'm not going to call on our panelists for this one. It's just going to be more of like an open forum discussion for those of us who are in the discussion. So how have you been able to find and or cultivate community at your school? Have there been any obstacles to this? And whoever wants to jump on the question first can go ahead and take it.
I guess I can start. As I kind of like alluded in my introduction, there wasn't a community at Quinnipiac when I had first gotten here. There was never also like the illusion that there was a community. Like it was very much clear to kind of everyone who's coming here that there was a lack of kind of multicultural presence on campus, at least from the outsider perspective. When I got here, I actually saw how like amazing and flourishing our multicultural community here is. We do have like a multicultural student leadership council that oversees all of the multicultural organizations. The only one we didn't have was one for Native American or Indigenous students. So I actually am the founder and the president of the Indigenous Student Union at Quinnipiac. So I had to, you know, do the thing where I sat in meetings and wrote constitutions and pretty much just create this thing out of nothing, which was really hard and really challenging, especially because at the time I was doing it alone. So I remember the semester that it happened and like that everything was really kicking up and I was in all these meetings after meetings with people. I got like a 2.8 GPA, which is very unlike me. And I was always very school oriented. And at the time I had planned on transferring from Quinnipiac like right before. And I was like, if this works, I'm going to stay. If this doesn't work, I'm getting out of here. And I had gotten into Cornell as a transfer. I was like, I'm going, like, I can't do this anymore. And I had gotten like one spark of hope. A professor at Quinnipiac who's been really supportive with like ISU and our indigeneity initiative, Professor Sean Duffy, kind of reached out to me and, you know, just lended his hand in support, asked if there's anything he could do. And that was kind of like the moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to stay and I'm going to make this happen. But we faced a lot of obstacles in making it happen. And even once we got the ball rolling and we got an e-board and I got Rania and Gabriella to become a part of it, even once that had happened, we had started to kind of reach more obstacles, whether it be reaching out to students, whether it be having our voices heard on the administrative sides of things. It's definitely been challenging, but it makes me really happy to know that now when students do come here in the future, specifically Native students or Indigenous students or just students who are interested in Indigenous identities, culture, and history, that they'll have that space to share that and they'll have that sense of community that a lot of us didn't have even when we first got on campus and that a lot of students before us didn't have. I've known a lot of Native students who have gone to Quinnipiac in the past and have graduated specifically from my tribe who didn't have a sense of that. And they were like, I just kind of hid my indigeneity and survived. And I didn't want that for students. So we did the thing. We made it happen. I'm looking to see if there's another part of the question that I missed. But yeah, so I think that now the way that we've kind of gotten it to work with everyone is just that we've found a really great group of students who either are Indigenous or who are just interested and passionate about, you know, Indigenous cultures, history, or social, or like advocating for social issues. And we've been able to like foster the sense of community. We've been able to create great relationships with interested and supportive faculty. And now that I'm leaving, I have like full faith that this organization is here to stay and it's going to be a place for future Indigenous students to be able to call home at Quinnipiac, which makes me very happy because I know what it's like to not exactly have that pocket within the greater community of your school.
I can kind of hop onto that because I know we bond over the same struggles, UConn and Quinnipiac. So when I got to the university, I got here in 2018 and I tried to get involved with NACP and I was told to go to craft night or book club. I was like, well, first of all, I hate reading, and second of all, craft night sounds problematic just in and of itself. So I didn't try to get involved until the next semester, spring semester. And I got hired on the spot, which I was like, oh wow, like they care. And then come to find out, everyone was leaving that had been involved with NACP. So they brought in a graduate assistant and Sage. And so like I was really thrown into it. I mean, my first task was flying to Oregon on behalf of the org and representing us at a conference. And I was like, all right, we're really doing this. But you know, the first thing I asked for when I got hired is I want a list of Native students, Indigenous students here at the university. And they gave me a list of like 28 or 30 students who identified, but it didn't account for 2 or more. It didn't account for students who, it only accounted for students who identified as like Native American, not Indigenous, nothing. And on top of that, I came to find that NACP itself, the title didn't contain Indigenous, so Indigenous students weren't comfortable here. And that was a problem, because we had inquiries from Indigenous students who were like, do I belong at NACP? Like students point blank asked, like, do you think I belong there? And that's when I was like, okay, time out. Like, yes, of course you belong here, but how are we gonna like go about that and change that and make sure these students do feel welcome here? So that's why we started NASA. And just adding that level of like, we're like inclusiveness and like we are a home and a safe space for you. I remember the first meeting, Zoe and I were just like blown away because we had all of these Indigenous students coming and being like, I don't know if I belong at PERLAC, I don't know if I belong at NACP, but I know I belong here. And we were like so thankful, and we were like, it was like a beacon of hope. We're like, wow, we're doing something right here. And then, as we connected students to NASA, we kind of thrived off of their interests. And, Zoe has her mentorship program, and we have other students that take on meetings and, share their cultures with us. So cultivating community to me is all about representation and inclusivity and making sure that our students have a space to express and identify, or simply, be in a space where they feel comfortable to reclaim their indigeneity. So the last thing I'll say is working against UConn's administration is like getting hit by a bus, honestly. It's like the slowest moving process. And I know Key and I have talked about that a lot. We bond over that, but eventually they listen, and I feel like the louder we get, the better. So we're just doing our best out here, but really glad that this community came together.
I can round us off and talk about Yale, and I'm sure Evan and Nolan can pitch in. But yeah, Evan mentioned this a little bit ago, but I mean, there have been Native students at all 3 of these universities since the beginning, most likely. Definitely at Yale. And at Yale, we have the Native American Cultural Center, which opened in 2013 as its own building, but before then existed in the attic of the Asian American Cultural Center for a little bit longer. I'm not sure exactly how much, maybe someone else knows, pop in or type it in the chat. Yeah, so we have like a physical space, and Evan and I arrived as first years, and we saw all these really amazing like Native upperclassmen like running things and dealing with very, very slow administration. We saw like a ton of institutional support, but this, like, I think people don't realize, like with Native communities, like it really, even we've been here for since 2013, so like nearly 10 years, but like it's still so slow moving. There's still so much left to do, not enough people to do it, specifically not enough people to do it. I think it's like really key. Like I'm sure you guys listening on the Zoom can like hear that like Kiara and Sage like clearly have been doing all of the work for so many different people for so long. And I think that's like really emblematic of what happens to Native people, especially Native women who have to lead things. I think that's like a huge challenge that we definitely run into at Yale. Yeah, and so I would say that that's our big challenge. And also it's very inspiring to see like what you both have done at UConn and QU, because like you have the word Indigenous in the title of like your group, and we still don't even have that, even though we've had our groups for longer. So it's kind of like, and that process, Evan and I are trying to lead that right now, and it's been like really difficult to get there's a lot of support, but like no action to change. We are the Association of Native Americans at Yale, and just like Sage, like we have people come up to us and be like, oh, like I'm Indigenous to blah blah blah, or like Taino or anything like that. Should I like come to the meeting? And like, of course you should. Like we're always stronger together. But it doesn't reflect that in the names. Like that's definitely a huge challenge of like our own community shutting borders on each other and like questioning people's indigeneity, like questioning all these things. That's like just so unproductive to what we're trying to do. Yeah, so really similar struggles, even though we're farther along, which is like sad, but also speaks to how like the amazing work that you've both been doing, because you're so far along in like the 3 years that you've been working. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Emma put that so wonderfully. I again want to express just how much I admire everyone on this call for all the work they've done at their universities over the past few years. We're still learning about it. And every time I hear about programming you all are doing, it just makes me so inspired. And I'm so proud to know your student organizations. I do think we came in, Hema and I, to a much more established cultural organization. We have, as Nolan mentioned, a cultural center on campus for Native students. We have our group, the Association of Native Americans at Yale, as well as other affiliate organizations for the centers and student staff at the centers. We have a decent amount of support already in place at Yale. And so I think that speaks to, as Hema was saying, the work that continues to be done to make communities as exclusive and strong as they possibly can, inclusive and strong as they possibly can be. I was thinking this because we have been discussing our name and how exclusive it can appear, and our organization can appear to people who are not just Indigenous to North America. We've also been reckoning and trying to address anti-Blackness in our community, as we're starting to see how that plays a role in our community and all Indigenous communities. And so I think, there will always continue to be work done to make spaces somewhere that is comfortable and welcoming and a place of joy for everyone.
Does anyone else want to speak to the community question before we move on to our last question?
I just want to add something. I just feel like it's important to note too, because we talk about these fly-ins and like we have discussed kind of like how Yale's program seems like, more advanced or whatever. But I think that it's important just to note, as we've all said, that there's still progress to be made in every organization. And that is something that we are all working on. And I think just like as students a part of these organizations, regardless of if you've been established for years or you're brand new, we're all working towards a common goal that no one is at, and that isn't necessarily the fault of the students who are in charge of it either. And there are institutional barriers to break everywhere. Even at Dartmouth, which is when I went there, I was like, this is perfect. Like there's nothing wrong with this. They have the house. They have all the different tribal symbols painted on their wall. Like, this is the coolest thing in the world. I'm gonna cry. And even now, talking to my friends who did end up at Dartmouth, they're just like, there's issues here too. And I've seen parallels in my story with what I've done with the Indigenous Student Union compared to what they're doing. And it's a continuous fight. And I just don't want to discredit that organizations who are seemingly more far along in the process don't also have that struggle and don't also face like those systemic barriers that make achieving the kind of community that we all want to foster really challenging. And I think it's important to note too that we are doing that on a student level. There is that student level of the community that we want to have. It's just really hard to be that in an administrative eye without that like endless support. And it is challenging because there's not enough people doing this kind of work. And that is a conversation about higher ed to have in general that I could rant about for days. But a cool thing that Quinnipiac did do is they have added more people to like their multicultural education space in like their kind of like chief diversity officers and stuff like that. They've added a few more staff to that who have been incredibly helpful. V, the new woman in charge, or the like assistant in charge, I guess, has been super helpful with us, especially as we were coming into the recognition process at Quinnipiac. We weren't allowed to, book spaces on campus to hold meetings and do stuff like that. So they've all been very helpful with getting that pushed along. We've had a lot of support from like student government and stuff. It's just, these are all goals or all issues that we have all encountered regardless of kind of how far along in the process we are or not. So I just wanted to kind of like recognize that this is kind of a universal thing. And I'm sure every Indigenous group at a PWI or even not at a PWI could probably tell you this, and it reflects a lot of the struggles that we also have just in society in general.
Thank you for that, Kiara. I know that us at NASA, like just seeing the work that you guys do at Quinnipiac and then also at Yale is really, it helps move us along and not feel like we're so like isolated, because sometimes it does feel like you're like a drop in the ocean. And it does feel like you're hitting a wall a lot of the times. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you to everyone else for sharing on this question as well. So our last question that we have for the panelists are, what advice would you give to prospective Indigenous students seeking to enter higher education?
I don't want to I don't want to feel like I'm hogging the spotlight, but I've always been good at breaking the ice. So I think my biggest piece of advice is to know, no matter how often it feels like it, that you're not alone. It can feel really hard as an Indigenous woman in academia and just an Indigenous person in academia in general, even just as a minority in academia. It can feel very isolating, and it can feel like you're kind of bearing the weight of like every responsibility that comes with being a Native student all by yourself. And whether or not you're the only Indigenous student at the school, in a sense, you're never really alone. And that's something I've learned a lot with not only branching out and reaching the new members of my e-board, but becoming connected with Yale natives and NASA. Like, even if I was doing this completely and totally on my own, I would have that support of you guys to fall back on. So just like knowing that no matter what, there is someone else out there that is feeling this way that can connect with you, I think is important, because I felt like I was kind of bearing all of the emotional burden of it on my own and I wasn't having anyone to share it with. And obviously the goal is so that we can give someone in their immediate community, in their immediate space, that support system, but just letting them know that that support is there and it's also beyond their school, I think is really important. And also that this is my biggest like pet peeve thing that I bring up at every meeting, but that it is not the responsibility of Indigenous students to educate the community that is supposed to be educating them, I think is like my biggest piece of advice. You're allowed to say no if someone asks you to come talk to your class, like talk to their class. You're allowed to say no if you don't feel comfortable giving a speech, stuff like that. You don't need to know everything just because it's your culture. Also, Native culture is not, there's not one culture, so that drives me insane too. You don't have to be an expert on yourself. You don't have to be an expert on other people. It's not your responsibility. You're supposed to be there to learn. And of course, it's good to educate people, but do it within your own boundaries and make sure that you're comfortable. And in this situation, the phrase be comfortable with being uncomfortable does not work. You should be comfortable and you should be putting your comfort and your ease and your mental health first. So that's my advice. I'm going to write all of that down and give it to every Indigenous student I ever meet now.
Yeah, I just want to sort of echo that point because I know from my experience being a Native student in academia and education in general can be very invalidating. I find that this is a problem in the world and in any experience you'll have as an Indigenous person, but there will be some people who invalidate your identity based off of blood quantum or what they assume about you by how you look or where you come from, but don't let that stop you or be an invalidating obstacle. Like, you know yourself and your culture and your identity and your needs better than anybody else, especially people who aren't educated on the things and specific needs that come from Native people and Native communities. And it can be hard to go through education feeling invisible and invalidated, but the most important thing is that you will find communities who see you and who resonate with you, as we all have here, thankfully. And if you don't, you can build that and be a part of that for yourself and for other people. And it's a hard thing to do, but it's really important to find those communities because they're going to make that work better, not only for everyone involved currently, but for everyone who's going to be involved in the future.
So I agree with both Samantha and Kiara, but something I want to touch upon was, for me at least, I was part of like several organizations on campus before ISU was an organization, and I always felt like the community questioned my identity, and ISU was the first place where it was okay to learn more about your background and do the research and figure out you know, the history of your people. Like there's no shame to that. And so one advice I would give is to never settle until you find the comfort, you know, and if that means putting in the work and creating that community and group that you need, then so be it. So yeah.
I definitely agree with Rania. That definitely spoke to me in my own experiences at UConn. I expected to like find my place within PERLAC. Uh, being Puerto Rican, like I said, is a huge part of who I am, but I actually ended up feeling so much more welcomed and accepted within NASA. And I definitely had that feeling of I'm not Native, I'm not Native American, like I'm Indigenous. Where do I fit in that struggle? When I first learned about NASA, I was like, me, I don't know. But I think I would definitely I would want to give out advice to Native students. Like, you may not think that this is for you, but if you look into it, if you really think like you will be welcomed. I've had those fears of I'm not meant to be here, but this is your culture. It's my culture. And it's a place that should be open to learn more about it. Like everyone's been saying, you don't need to know everything, especially for Tainos. A lot has been lost, and a lot isn't passed down anymore. The majority of Puerto Ricans don't know about their Taino heritage and don't know how to find out more. But because of NASA, I've been able to learn new things, be able to do that research. My mom always joins NASA virtual events, and she likes to learn new things and try to give some perspectives from the island, how it was growing up with some of the Native culture. And I would just there's issues with UConn, no doubt about it. But I think I would just love to tell students what Sage and Zoe have created is such an amazing, welcoming space. I always tell people to come and don't be afraid of who you are and be confident that this is where you're meant to be.
Yes, so much yes. So everything that everyone's been saying. I feel like this in itself is kind of healing because it's oh, you guys feel that way too. It's just nice. One thing I would say that I think Evan and I both think about a lot recently is for incoming first years or just Native people who are looking to get involved, always talk to your elders, whoever was the year above you, the seniors, the juniors, because I think these institutions make it so difficult to pass things down, I worry that the new leadership, once Evan and I leave, won't maintain the same relationships with QU and UConn, and I worry that all these things will be lost, all of our momentum on combating anti-Blackness in the community and trying to change the name. If we don't get that before we're done with our presidency, will it happen? So I feel it's so important to tell new people you don't have to start from scratch like someone once did or one project once did. You will always be there. We're your little guardians. We'll always be there to support you and help you resolve all your issues and talk through all of your things. So always talk to the people who have been there before, because they will always have wisdom to give you.
Yeah, I love what everyone's saying. I just wanted to add a little bit. I guess from my own experience growing up in a predominantly white town at a high school that used to be the Indians, my identity was completely silenced and just never felt comfortable. Everyone knew I was Penobscot, but it wasn't something that I ever tried to embrace because I just, kids were kids and they were gonna, be hurtful. So it was just easier to blend. And then when I got to college, I was at first I started to do that. And in some of my classes, sometimes it feels easier not to be the Indigenous student, because once you are expected to be the Indigenous student, you're expected to become the teacher on Indigenous topics in classes that you yourself are trying to learn, which is really taxing. So my biggest piece of advice is, obviously everyone has their own journey at their own pace to reclaiming their identity and reclaiming their comfort with their identity, which is completely valid. But like once you, I mean, I personally am still on my journey, but I feel like I've gotten to a certain point where like I'm willing to speak out against professors and be like, actually, no, or like, actually, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't feel comfortable speaking on that. Or as a matter of fact, like, no, I don't know about food insecurity with the Diné people. Like, I'm not Diné. Like, people, I feel like just tokenized all the time in the classroom, expecting to be an encyclopedia of Indigenous everything. And we're not. I mean, we're still trying to reclaim our own specific cultures. So my biggest piece of advice would be to just fully embrace your indigeneity, because I feel like sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but some people, as we know, wish they had it. So if we can just, encourage our youth to embrace themselves and just instill confidence in them, they'll be able to succeed as future ancestors. So also, to kind of, last thing, I promise, echo what Hema said. Like, I say to Zoe and Sammy all the time, like, we just hired Sammy, like, snaps to Sammy. But I always say, like, I might be graduating in May, but I'm not going anywhere. Like, I will be making sure things keep running, administration keeps listening. So yeah, we will always be here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Does anyone have any last thoughts on this final question? Okay, cool. So we wanted to reserve this last little bit for any questions from the audience. Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll get to you. So with that being said, does anyone have any questions for our panelists?
Key, take it away. You're first.
Scary, absolutely terrifying. Okay. So like I said, I'm graduating December. So I'm gonna take next semester just to work, make some money, so that when I go to grad school, I don't have an empty wallet. And hopefully travel a little, since that'll be like the last time I have free time for the next couple of years. Currently applying to a Master's of Public Health programs, looking to specialize in community health for some programs, and other programs are kind of like the socio-medical perspective a little bit. So like behavioral health, population health, stuff like that. Looking to intersect kind of sociology, historical kind of like implications of public health, and then also just like with current community health together. So I'm applying to those programs right now. They'll be in within the next month, which is terrifying, and I'll find out in the following months. And then I'm gonna go there and do that, hopefully work for a little bit, and then the end goal is to be a professor. I think it's really important to kind of contribute to the representation of Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women in academia, and I think that I would have had a lot easier time in college if I had some professors who had similar identities as me and had experienced kind of the similar struggles of that. So I hope to kind of be that for students one day, and I always wanted to be a teacher, so I'm excited. But that's where my next steps are taking me, but I'm in absolute denial about it.
Sage, do you want to take that one next?
Yeah, so eventually law school, I mean, like, fingers crossed, could change, but like that's where my heart is right now. I want to focus specifically on, I mean, like, long term, I want to develop a legal nonprofit to address tuition waivers and like just reparations for Native youth, trying to enter higher education in general, just creating equitable solutions to be able to do that and provide easy access. As of immediate plans, I'm not planning to go right to law school. Probably going to take at least a year off. I was fortunate to get a scholarship this past spring that allows me to spend some time in DC, at least for an internship for the upcoming summer, and then hopefully for the fellowship that will last me like a year in DC, which is really cool and an amazing opportunity that I just felt like I had to grasp. So that's me.
Let me just hype Sage up really quick. And she knows I do this to her all the time, but she won the Truman Scholarship. So for all her incredible work. So that's what she's talking about. I just wanted to highlight that. Rania, do you want to take it next?
Yes. So I am currently in the process of applying to law school, and it's very overwhelming, but I'm trying to get through it. Like I said, I'm first gen college student, so I had to really put myself out there to make the connections and find the mentors in my field that I was comfortable with. And thankfully, I've done that here at Quinnipiac. So I'm looking forward to finding out where I'm going to be for the next 3 years. Yeah.
And then Sophia, do you want to round off this question? Then we have another one in the chat afterwards.
Yeah, so I am in the process of applying to grad schools for a Master of Social Work. I love kids, so that is going to be my focus, kind of like childcare and families. And I am planning on going to grad school in Scotland, which is a little different, but they do have a very good like social work program within the UK. A much better education system. So I'm kind of planning on taking what I learned there and possibly bringing it back to the US and implementing it and just making sure that kids have a better experience. The university I'm looking at also has a fellowship into decoloniality. Kind of fudged that up, but I'm very interested in that, and I'm kind of in the process of also applying to that fellowship and trying to continue what I've kind of done with NASA and UCNC over and even across the Atlantic. It's a little more difficult over there. So yeah.
Thank you, guys. Another question we got in the chat was, what advice would you give to colleges/universities to recruit Indigenous students and to support them while on campus? And this is to anyone who wants to answer it.
I love the fly-in situation. I love it. I think that every school should have one. I loved it. It really made me feel comfortable going into college, that there were other people who had left home and that there were other people who were doing this big scary thing, because in high school, college is terrifying. But something I want to point out, and I'm always very transparent about this, is I've been very fortunate with my tribal background that I have never had to worry about affording college. And that is not the case with other Indigenous populations. So I think offering scholarships is really important, especially for a lot of the schools that do have bigger Indigenous populations are like the Ivies or other really expensive schools. So offering some sort of scholarship for Native students or just financial support in general, taking into consideration the background that is associated with low income of people that are living in Indigenous communities, I think is important. But just fostering that community and showing that in your recruitment, as well as the financial ease, I think is important.
One thing I would say is that we all know Zoom sucks, but it also has brought a lot of people together. I think, especially for Native communities, it has been instrumental in like changing the way that admissions processes work. So I really don't want people to just ignore all the good work that it's done. I know that at Yale tomorrow they're hosting a special essay writing workshop for Native students where they can work on their admissions essays with admissions officers, which is something that they offered at the fly-in, but you had to be able to go, or pay part of it or apply to be getting into it, but like this is a free thing. So for more college admissions offices to be like, yeah, we can do one-on-one Zooms with you, like you don't have to leave your community yet if you want to come here. You know, we can offer resources like right to you even from far away, things like that. I think colleges could really capitalize on that more often and like support that and uplift that.
Okay, thank you guys. The next question we got is, how does your gender identity and sexuality impact your experiences as an Indigenous student in your school and community?
I keep doing this. I keep doing it. I can't handle awkward silence though. So I think that specifically with my gender, being a female identifying Indigenous student, similar to what Hema had said, there's this like expectation to kind of take the mic and be the voice of things. But it's the same time where there's that expectation to do it, but then there's also backlash when you do it. That is a weird thing. And like, you're not only navigating now as like a token Indigenous student, you're also navigating school as a woman. For me personally, I'm part of the LGBTQ community, so I'm navigating it through that. So it's kind of just like an addition to the struggles that you're encountering and just like an addition to your identity that you're working through. Because I think a big part of the challenge is like the identity crisis that you often have. So I've had an additional identity crisis on top of that, like with my sexuality. So I don't know if my sexuality so much, and I'm thankful for this, hasn't impacted me as a Native student specifically, but it's definitely impacted me personally with my identity, but also just like as a student in general, like, you know, navigating those spaces and dealing with like the kind of backlash you get when you embrace and are open about what your sexuality is.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, Kiara, for answering that one. We'll have one more question because we're like just about out of time, but if anyone wants to touch on what advice would you give to non-Indigenous faculty who teach Indigenous materials, if anyone wants to speak on that.
I can talk on that a little bit. First and foremost, as a non-Indigenous faculty, I would say absolutely make it known that you are not claiming to be Indigenous in doing this and teaching these materials. And secondly, like as Indigenous students, I think we can appreciate like the willingness to use your platform to teach these, you know, this curriculum, but just like making sure that you're not spreading any harm with what you're teaching, that, you know, you're not spreading misinformation and misrepresentation, because unfortunately some of us, myself personally, have had experiences where it's not an Indigenous professor and the information is just like mind-blowing, that like I have to sit there as a Native student and listen to this. So again, like absolutely it means the world to use your platform, but just making it clear that you're not speaking on behalf of Indigenous people as a non-Indigenous person, but rather like using the space in your platform as an ally.
Okay, with that, if no one else wants to speak to that, since we are right at 7, I'll go ahead and end the discussion for today. Thank you so much for our panelists. And I just wanted to speak on what Sage said as well. I'm not Indigenous or Native. I think I forgot to mention that this is my first time like flying a Zoom in like a year. So apologies that I forgot to mention that in my introduction. But with that being said, for everyone who's at our UConn community, make sure you come out to NASA, even if you aren't Native or Indigenous. We really welcome allies in the space or people who are just looking to get more involved and be a good advocate in the community as well. So with that being said, yeah, Sage just dropped her email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to her or me. Both of our emails are like plastered over like our NASA Instagram and our NICP Instagram. So yeah, does anyone else from Yale or Quinnipiac want to say something in closing out? Okay, cool. I think Evan just dropped her email in chat if anyone has any questions for her. And then Kiara and everyone else are just dropping Instagrams as well if anyone wants to take like a screenshot or take that down. Okay, cool. With that being said, thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate being in community with y'all. Yeah, thank you.